We've met some of their family members and we're invested to see if they make it through this alive and like what changes are wrought in them as people as a result of being through the harrowing experience of war. Imagine if someone came up to you and asked, anything new, how's life going, and you just gave them an update about the plot of the book you're currently reading. That's how I'm feeling right now. I feel very invested in certain characters and where they're headed. The latest is Nikolai Rostov has returned home to his family after serving in the war. Napoleon is now an ally with Russia, so that's a whole weird political situation that I probably need to read the history of again because I wasn't paying attention when I learned it in the first place. Nikolai visited home and he was well received by his family, and then he kind of fell in with the wrong crowd, and you guessed it, Dolokhov became buddy-buddy with Nikolai. Dolokhov really likes Sonya, who really likes Nikolai. Sonya rebuffed Dolokhov's marriage proposal. Dolokhov did not take it well, and he gambled with Nikolai in a card game, and he really took him for all he was worth, plus like 40,000 more, so that Nikolai had to return home in shame. And now, even though he was telling Sonya that he saw her as a friend, his self-confidence has taken such a hit from that gambling incident that he doesn't feel worthy of her now. That's what's going on with them. Pierre had his own run-in with Dolokhov. He got married to this woman who he didn't actually propose to, but was celebrated into marrying. This woman was, we think, unfaithful with Dolokhov. Very high chances of that being true. So Pierre challenged this guy, Dolokhov, to a duel. Early in the morning, he strode his paces. He asked for instructions for how to fire the gun because Pierre has never fired a gun before.
Say again, please?
Houston, we have a problem.
He turned, and by some miraculous outcome, he actually hit Dolokhov, wounded him pretty badly, and then it was Dolokhov's turn. Honestly, he got hit, so I think in the rules he's supposed to just bow out, but he didn't. He fired back.
We were on a break!
And Pierre was not moving. He was standing in the middle, even though the seconds on both sides of the duel were telling him to turn aside or to move out of the way so that he wouldn't get hit. Another miracle happens and Dolokhov does not hit him. Duel is over. Duels are supposed to be over honor. You'd think that that whole incident would have earned Pierre a little bit more respect. It didn't actually accomplish that. So he's feeling very discouraged. His marriage has fallen apart. From the beginning, he said that he loved her, but he didn't actually feel it in his heart. So he's not doing okay. And then the added element of his bestie, Andre, having gone missing during the war. He was missing in action, he was not a prisoner, he was not reported as dead. His pregnant wife is back at home with her sister-in-law, Maria, and her father-in-law. She starts to go into labor. And Tolstoy really reveres women in labor, but it never really ends well for them in a Tolstoy novel. So that's definitely a spoiler, but it's consistent in his work, so maybe it's a trigger warning. Miraculously, Andre returns home just in time for the birth of his son. His wife dies, and the last memory he has of her is of her looking up at him as if to say, why did you let this happen? She felt abandoned by him before he left for the war. He and Maria saw her last look at them, and it's haunting them. They're not okay either. So we've got a lot of not okayness going around. Pierre is on this coach ride, and he runs into a mason. And this guy seems like he knows what he's doing with his life, and Pierre obviously doesn't. And so the mason kind of sells him on having spiritual confidence by entering the Brotherhood of the Freemasons. And so we have a really long passage where we're following Pierre in the initiation into the Masons, which was very strange. Lots of borrowed things from Christianity that are kind of like hammered into different things. Makes sense. So he leaves that with not only a lot of gloves, because he's given a new pair of gloves for when he does certain things. And he's also given a pair of women's gloves that he should give to his future wife, who should be a better person than the person that he married first, which is interesting. So lots of gloves, lots of ideals to strive for, and he's very happy about that. And one of the things that he is assigned to work on is how he does justice for his fellow man. So when he goes home, he's decided that he's going to cancel the debts and make it possible for all of his servants to live more freely, to have education, medical care, and workers' rights. But he's not great about managing things, organizing things, following through with things. So the people that he tells to go about that for him are not the most trustworthy. So he kind of ends up doing things very halfway, and they don't actually impact in the same way that he wanted it to, or he believes it is happening. And then there's no real conversation about how Andre has arrived back home. He just shows up back home at the right time and sees his newborn son and the death of his young wife. Also, it doesn't seem like Pierre and Andre talk about that at all either. Like, even though they've both been in a place of discouragement and doubt and wonder, they haven't so much connected on that. And then they talk about it, and Pierre shares he's found confidence and security in the brotherhood, and he tells Andre that that's the way to live, and Andre is not sold, but he does take Pierre's advice and follows his example more fully when it comes to doing right by the people who are working his land, caring for his properties, and he actually follows through on it because he is very organized. He came home from the war and he almost immediately set to writing plans for how things could be better coordinated. That's another one of his things that is coming due. So he took his finalized report into the upper management of the War Planning Committee, pitched it to them. They told him they can't use this because they couldn't teach it. The problem is not that they don't have instruction, it's that they don't have teachers, they don't have people that are actually going there in person to take care of things. They consistently want him to do that, but they, I think, have given him a role as more of a planner at this point. That is what Andre is up to. His sister Maria, because she is very self-sacrificing and she has successfully stayed at home and not gotten married off to terrible people, is caring for his young son. He has been quite ill. He's had a fever and it hasn't broken, and there's a scene of them fretting over that, and finally the fever breaks. And in the middle of that, when they're not sure what the outcome is going to be, Andre takes a break away from the sick room and he reads a letter that's a report of what's going on in the war. And he's kind of sucked into it. He's taken away from his current circumstances, but when he returns to the room, he feels shame that distracted him from his current circumstance. It's kind of like he aged so much from going through that experience of having a sick child, the thought of losing him, that he has an extra wrinkle on his forehead and his appearance is completely changed. That is how his best friend Pierre sees him when they are reunited and talking about all of these philosophic things about the meaning of life and how to live a good life. What else? There's this guy named Denisov who is also friends with Nikolai Rostov. So Nikolai has this buddy named Denisov who he served with in the war, and he brought him home to meet his family when he visited, and Denisov fell in love with his little sister, Natasha. And there's a pretty big age gap there. She's really not ready for marriage. So despite her feeling affection for him and him being desperately in love with her and proposing, she asks her mom what to do, and her mom tells her to refuse, and so she does turn him down, and he's pretty crushed about that, but of course he still has to go back to war as well. He's just a very big-hearted person. He sees how his unit have been so under-resourced, underfed. Meanwhile, other parts of their army have been well supplied, and so he goes out and he steals supplies to feed his men, and he gets in trouble for that. He gets written up in a report, and he goes in to, take a look at the report, to sign the report, report and he gets shot in the leg on the way. He didn't want to have to face charges for stealing the food. He didn't want to go into jail for what he did. So he's kind of happy to be waylaid in a hospital for some time where he doesn't have to follow through on the red tape of all that. But the hospital is really not the best because they've got typhus running through, they have a lot of infection, and there's just not enough medical care to really adequately clean and diagnose and treat all of these men who are just crammed in there. And so he's not doing great. His friend Nikolai goes to visit him and gets a letter from him to plead his case. I think it's a good time to mention how soldiers in this story, the younger ones especially, have had this very extreme reverence, almost like a celebrity admiration for the Emperor Alexander when they see him. I guess it's probably the equivalent of if you see someone who is in a high political status. He decides to do something really bold and to take that report directly to Emperor Alexander. He knows where he's visiting at the time and he tries to make his way in, but he kind of gets intercepted from that and someone sends him packing because he's not following the correct process. He also was in his off-duty clothes. He wasn't dressed like a soldier. As he's dismissed, he fortunately runs into a person who knows him, who knows his friend Denisov, who is languishing in the hospital, who would actually receive that news and act on it. So he gives him the letter, and he doesn't really see what happens next and interpret it correctly. He sees this guy who is gonna intercede for him leaving the city and talking to the emperor, and the emperor says something like, "I'm not above the law." So he basically has dismissed this plea. Rostov, seeing it all from a distance, is just so overcome with emotion by this guy's righteousness. So that was a really sad moment because he didn't know what happened. This guy literally had his friend's life in his hands and he just let it go. That's how far I am so far. So much has happened, so much still to come. Until next Wednesday, I would love to hear how your big book is going this month and what kind of progress you've made on it. And if you're not reading a big book this summer, but you have one that's been staring at you on your shelf and you plan to read it soon, let me know what the name of that book is. What did you think of Volume 2? What surprised you? I would love to hear what resonated with you when you read this book, and I'm so excited to come to you with another update of my experience reading this massive novel next week. I will see you then.